On September 3, 1939, following the German invasion of Poland, Britain and France declared war on Germany and its allies, thus starting the world's second international conflict. German troops, using a new tactic called Blitzkrieg or Lightning War, swept through Western Europe, taking country after country. German troops managed to trap the bulk of the Allied armies at the Danish port of Dunkirk. After being ordered to halt by Hitler, the German army gave the Allies the much-needed time to evacuate more than 350,000 troops from the beaches.
With the West under his control, Hitler turned his attention east to Russia. In a shocking move, Hitler launched a massive offensive against the Russian army, and over the course of a few months had pushed the Soviets back all the way to the gates of Moscow. As the weather worsened, the Soviet counterattack repelled the German army from Moscow and forced him to retreat the rest of the war.
On the other side of the world, Japan had slowly been taking over Asia, despite hard Allied resistance. In a bold move aimed at crippling the United States' abilities to fight in the Pacific theater, the Japanese bombed the naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Japan also simultaneously attacked the United States in the Philippines and the British Empire in Malaysia, Singapore, and Hong Kong. These attacks altogether, especially the attack on Pearl Harbor, led to the United States' entry into World War II and the escalation of conflict in the Pacific theater. Immediately, the United States was in fierce combat with Axis troops. America and Allied forces were handily beaten by battle-hardened Japanese soldiers again and again until they broke Japanese naval codes and defeated them in the crucial battle at Midway. Allied forces then began what would be known as island hopping in order to get in range to bomb the Japanese mainland. One of the important islands was Guadalcanal, and the US forces achieved a strategic victory over Japanese land and naval forces.
In Europe, American and British bombers began a combined offensive that was aimed at destroying the German war machine. Despite aiming for industrial targets, bombers often destroyed entire cities like Cologne, Mainz, and Bochum. British planes firebombed Hamburg, resulting in 40,000 civilian casualties. This was the first war where civilians suffered massive casualties because of military offensives.
As the Allies saw a need to end the war as fast as possible, they went on the offensive in Europe. Soviet and German armies faced off in the Battle of Kursk in eastern Ukraine. In an effort to regain control of the Eastern Front, German armored divisions attempted to smash through Soviet defensive lines. But after weeks of fighting, Soviet strength prevailed and meant that Germany would never be on the offensive again in Europe. In the Mediterranean, American troops began an airborne assault on Sicily, which was done to create another front for the Germans and to relieve pressure from the Soviets. The invasion led to the toppling of Benito Mussolini and the subsequent withdrawal of Italy from the war.
Now under pressure from Stalin, Allied forces began the largest invasion ever attempted in history.
In their great British bases, the Western armies were massing the guns, the shells, the tanks, the trucks, the planes, the food stocks, the gasoline, spare parts, field equipment, mine detectors, medical supplies, and troops. And the troops, British, Americans, Canadians, Indians, Australians, New Zealanders, South Africans, Dutchmen, Poles, Norwegians, Czechs, and Danes. Troops of the United Nations. Troops who are the stuff of any invasion, troops who on their unassuming shoulders carry the whole world's hopes for liberty.
Codenamed Operation Overlord, it had been years in the planning. Its main objective was to create another European front for the Germans to fight on and to liberate France. The first step in the operation would be to storm the targeted beaches in Normandy, France. Allied troops needed to attack in 5 areas along the 21-mile stretch of coastline. The beaches were nicknamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. American troops would land at Utah and Omaha being the best defended, and a combination of British and Canadian troops would land on the other 3. In order to make sure that German forces in Normandy wouldn't know exactly when and where the attack would take place, the Allies came up with a deception plan codenamed Operation Fortitude. Operation Fortitude was broken into two parts, both aimed at deceiving the German high command into believing that the invasion would be in a different place. Fortitude North used a fake radio traffic to lead the Germans into expecting an attack on Norway, and Fortitude South involved creating a fictitious army that was stationed across the channel from Calais. This meant building up a massive amount of fake vehicles, troops, and resources so that if seen by German planes it would look like a real army. Inflatable tanks, dummy airplanes, and fake airfields fooled the Germans into believing the attack was at Calais. Planning the attack also depended on the weather and the tide. Allied planners wanted high tides on invasion day because landing troops wouldn't be exposed on the beach for very long. The attack was originally supposed to begin on June 5, 1944, but rough seas saw it to be postponed to the next day. Because men and ships were already in place, postponing the invasion again would result in it not taking place another month, so the invasion was ordered. Airborne landings started around 1:30 in the morning by paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions.
Because of cloudy skies and poorly marked drop zones, many troops were dropped miles from their intended targets. Many paratroopers were killed on impact when their parachutes did not open in time because their planes were flying too low to avoid anti-aircraft fire. Many also drowned when they landed in intentionally flooded fields.
D-Day began the invasion of German-controlled Europe. Within 3 months, more than 3 million Allied troops would be fighting the battle in France.
I was drafted in 1941. D-Day was my 64th mission. We were to fly down the coast of Cherbourg, and our target was the big guns that were on the coastline there. And so I bombed the beach. My bombs were away at 6:23 on the morning of D-Day. And we could see those boys that were coming in the boats heading for the beach. And at least we were digging some holes for them to get into when they got on the beach, because we were not able to knock many of those guns out.
Following the airborne drops came the beach landings.
Across 50 miles of beach, 160,000 Allied soldiers and 195,000 Allied sailors began the largest amphibious invasion our world has ever seen.
At Utah and Omaha Beach, the men landed under heavy machine gun fire from gun emplacements overlooking the beaches, and the shore was mined and covered with obstacles, making it almost impossible to land vehicles. At Omaha Beach, the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions faced the entire 352nd German Division, instead of the expected single regiment. This meant that the beach was much more heavily defended than the others. For support, 2 DD tank companies were dropped 5,000 yards from shore. 27 of the 32 tanks flooded and sank along with 33 crew members. Some tanks that had been disabled on the beach provided support fire until they ran out of ammunition. By late morning, there were more than 2,000 casualties and only 600 men had left the beach to higher ground. But once the German defenders began to run out of ammunition, the American troops were able to establish a definitive beachhead. At Gold, Juno, and Sword, several fortified towns were cleared and 2 major gun emplacements at Gold were disabled using specialized tanks. As soon as Allied troops had cleared the immediate area around the beaches, they focused all of their might for one swift push through France. Fighting in Normandy's fields, or the bocage, became famous for its intensity. Despite being outnumbered, German soldiers fought to the bitter end in the name of the Führer.
However, their valiance could not stop the Allied war machine as it pushed the Germans back to Paris, which was liberated in 1945 and eventually out of the country into Germany. It would only be a matter of time before Soviet troops in the east marched on Berlin, or met up with the American-British troops in the west. And eventually Berlin was besieged by the Soviets in April 1945, and the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany followed a month later on the 8th of May, 1945. This marked the end of the war in Europe.
The Allies failed to achieve all of their goals on the first day. The 5 bridgeheads weren't even connected until the 12th day of June. But once the bridgeheads were established, the Allies were able to ferry supplies and men into northwestern France. By the end of Operation Overlord, over 1 million men and thousands of pounds of supplies were in Europe. The Germans lost roughly 1,000 men, while the Allied casualties summed up at about 10,000, with 4,414 confirmed dead. The success of D-Day was crucial for the victory of the Allies in the war. Operation Overlord was and still is the greatest amphibious operation in the history of modern arms. The tides turned against the Germans at Normandy, resulting in a shortening of the war and the Allies gaining momentum on the continent of Europe.
We were fighting the village of Oberhofen, which was near about 20 miles west of Strasbourg, and we'd been in that village 3 times trying to take the town. We'd gotten the Germans all boxed up at the end of the village, and Jerry heard the tank coming up the street. He sent the artillery in and hit the tank, and that's when I got hit to it at the same time.
Although many lives were lost on this day, it was considered an overwhelming success by commanders. This event is also considered a point of national pride because of how successful it was and because of how many soldiers gave their lives to ensure the mission's triumph.